Dr. Joy, an award-winning psychologist, Fulbright Scholar, management consultant, leadership expert, and holistic healer on a mission to rehumanize our inner and outer worlds so that we holistically thrive, starting with the world of work. Hello, Dr. Joy. Thank you so much for being here. It's such an honor. Dr. Joy, to get us started, I have been doing the work of personal and organizational transformation for many years. I care a lot about the path of understanding where we're going, but beginning with understanding who we are and how we came to be who we are. And so as the first question, I thought I'd like to turn that question to you and ask you, tell us a little bit about who you are and the path that led you to become the person you are. Who is Dr. Joy and how did you become who you are?
I'm going through it as we are speaking right now. First, it's just locating like where I am really and taking the look back to see where I've come. But I'm really so focused on the future right now. But I think when I was just sitting and thinking about our conversation and just introducing who I am, I think it was so important to actually position it first from a place of the self outside of work, the unbounded self, if I can put it that way, which we almost get to when we get into this unraveling process. Sometimes it's a crisis, something happens, and you tend to ask those bigger questions. Sometimes it's just this accumulation of the deep dissatisfaction or maybe even confusion about like where do I need to be and how do I define who I am? And I think for me, definitely, I started asking those big questions when I experienced a lot of death recently in my life with my father, both my fathers. So I grew up actually with my stepfather and my mom. My biological father was never in my life until later on. So I guess I always grew up with this sense of just like being this outsider sort of being, even within my family system. So from a very young age, I've always just been curious about human behavior, like, starting with sometimes even painful questions like, why did this man that called himself my father leave and just like kind of decide not to take part in this life? And over time, you just kind of get to understand a little bit more of who you are becoming despite that. And I'm sure that's the story that a lot of people that grew up in perhaps even marginalized community background have and share together. But one thing for sure that seems consistent throughout the identity of who I am is that I'm a believer, DeEtta, and in a very big way. Like, I believe in my creator, that I did come from somewhere. I believe that in life, in all of life, and that it's purposeful and there's a reason that we are all here. And that's a big part of my identity that I've woken up to just the last 2 years. Apart from, being an award-winning psychologist and being a global leader and a Fulbright Scholar and all those big terms, which were amazing experiences. I won't take that away, but I think at the core of the unraveling is realizing I'm a believer, I'm a probable creation, I'm an earth being as well, so that I when I step outside of my door, there's a certain consciousness about who I am in relation to everything else around me. And that is what Africans call Ubuntu, a philosophy of I am because we are. And in most cases, we look at it from this essence of an interconnected humanity. But after studying Ubuntu for 3 years at Pepperdine, actually, so I left my continent to go study Ubuntu in America. And after just deep diving in that and trying to see its relevance in the larger story of how leadership is transforming and how I'm transforming as I show up as a global leader, I kind of just realized that there's a lot of commonality in who we are as humans as well, right? Yes, there's a bigger regional identity, like being an African, but for instance, we connected regardless of that. Perhaps there's that face value of being Black, woman, but I think you said it quite well in the beginning. Like it was beyond those categories. It was at this place of here we are, enjoying this work, being called to co-create together and sort of add value in passions that intersect, right? And close to that is also then my identity also as a lover as well. That's something that we hardly ever mention in professional spaces, but after just going through an intentional process of self-rediscovery, I'm owning more being a lover. I love ideas. I love living. I love words. I love experiences, travel, and I love heart, right? And that's also this influence how I show up and the importance of kindness in how I interact with people as an earth being, a fellow earth being, which really pulls it down to a sense of commonality. So, I mean, there's, as I said, it's still such an evolving sense-making process for me right now. And I appreciate this question, actually, because it's kind of forcing me to dive deeper into my oasis, my waters, about like what's at the core of it. And I'm slowly coming to that. And most importantly, showing up with it more fully in the spaces that I influence and occupy.
I love your answer. I always do. Every time we speak, I feel so inspired by the way that you kind of refuse to make things too small or overly simple. Like simple, as in simplicity, is beautiful and wonderful, but everything doesn't have to be one thing or another, right? That you know, you talk about Ubuntu and you talk about I am because we are, and then you expand and talk about consciousness and spirituality and being a lover, and you unpack what that means in ways that help all of those things be connected to each other. And so the ways in which you're able to talk about who you are and the work that you do and the accomplishments that you've had and the way that you show up in spaces where you're helping others on their journey as all part of the same narrative is so helpful for somebody like me who's often been told to make things smaller, to make things more finite so that it's easier for everybody to understand. You know, when I've in past, I've had so many people say to me, listen, in order to market yourself, you have to just pick a bucket. You have to make it really simple for people to understand what you do. You have to be, you know, either an equity, diversity, and inclusion person or a leadership person or a management expert or a consultant or whatever it is. You have to pick a bucket. And I think in your situation, it's so similar. You probably even have more buckets than I do. And so to be able to embody and also reinforce that being all of those things at the same time is the brilliance. And just because it's not easy to understand means maybe the messaging needs to be tweaked, and maybe it's part of the process of kind of transformation that's happening around the world right now, where we're going from being very simple and kind of binary and to being much more expansive in the way that we think about not just ourselves, but also the world. You and I have talked about this before too.
And I think it's normal when you enter that space of unknown, newness, for us to catch up with the language of expressing what it is we're going through. You know, when I read up on a lot of features that are talking about this time, this moment that we're in of great transformation, you know, they speak about how this is when we define whether we want to be deliberate in how we sort of define the moment for ourselves and the role that we want to play, or do we want to just be part of the story. And then when we look back and tell the story of what has happened to you as well, of course you'll struggle just the language for it at first, and it's through these engagements that I speak to you and slowly expand my vocabulary a little bit more because of just your maybe life experience. I'm like, ooh, nice word. But more than nice word, it's like, love how you put that, actually. You've helped me really just articulate and look at that at a better lens. And I've made peace with that unknown a little bit more. But I think, to be fair, it's easier to be me now that I'm a founder than when I was in a very big Deloitte institution, for instance, where what you're saying around buckets is definitely still a part of how you, market yourself or self-promote in the workplace, which we don't talk about it a lot, but it plays a very big role in terms of your growth and movement within the space, regardless of how you do it or not.
So help me understand a little bit more, because I love what you just said also about being a founder. I know that you are the founder of Nomalanga Tribe. I'm very interested to learn more about that work. And also, how do you, the kind of work that you're doing with your clients and customers related to this idea of transformation and transformational leadership. Tell us a little bit more about that work.
So what we've come to learn as students of leadership is that it's not just transformational in terms of what we found through, I think transformational leadership also came to the context of the financial crisis and trying to sort of bounce back from that sort of depressed markets and trying to inject some charisma into the system, etc. Change, right? And then but what we're finding is that leadership is changing not in terms of the style and its horizontal sense of is this a situational leader versus a transformational leader versus a conscious leader, responsible leader, etc. It's more now about the actual worldview of how you then show up as a leader. So, for instance, the first gear of leadership that we know when we get into the sort of car itself, understanding leadership, it is, of course, what we know leadership to be traditionally, that command, control, maybe sometimes a little bit of visioning, looking ahead, etc. And then over time, there was a shift, right, that's moving now into the work that we do now around inclusion. Can leaders be more participatory? Can we have a more shared approach to how we see leadership to be, as opposed to it being something that is so bounded in a title or in a person or in even a level or even a select few people at the top that we call leaders? Is there a way to look at it in the second gear where we expand about it and a bit more post-heroic? And I know we spoke about this a little bit a few months ago, and I love what you brought into my reasoning around it, that perhaps we need to even think of a new word that's not about post-heroic, that's just explaining in an affirmative way what it is outside of past and its legacy that we've known, because it's so entrenched into our system, even in Africa, right? As I said, I had to leave South Africa to then get myself obviously into this space where you can think a bit more bigger and in an unbounded way, and we're also trying to find solutions from the first world in terms of, what's out there to support this developing continent and region. And then when you get there and you hear them talking about how you've basically been just brought up from a young age, particularly when you just look at indigenous upbringing, where it's still alive, especially in the home, right? But something happens when you now get given a title and enter a fancy office. We kind of forget that the teachings of being human, of being inclusive, of recognizing another person, of acknowledging that we can actually go far together. And that is breeding a different kind of leadership that has always been present in the fabrics of our ancient society. But we have lost it ourselves as Africans because of our need to also compete, because of greed, because of selfishness, and all sorts of things. When I write about like personal wellness and connected to the well-being of systems, right, where the leader is actually influencing people, spaces, and things and ideas. This person needs to think in a way that's outside of themselves. In fact, what we're seeing in research is that the more they put pressure on themselves to have the answers and know everything and command and control and categorize, this world that we're living in now is just shuffling everything and causing even more stress into the system, where now the select few of people that we have collectively defined as leaders holds this immense responsibility that actually needs every one of us stepping into our power and our own sense of leadership in impacting our inner and outer world. And I think that's kind of the dynamic I've been seeing in terms of what's happening in the leadership scholarship fraternity, but also how it actually relates practically to my context as an African leader who's in the global landscape, who loves the culture and wants to infuse it and also adding value, but understanding that, it's in a global environment where perhaps we need to pace it a little bit more, not just for Americans or Europeans, but even for Africans themselves to unlearn and maybe even relearn some of the things that their grandmothers have embedded in terms of what leading is, outside of it being a tool for business.
Yes.
Because I think we've just looked at the definition of leadership within the context of serving a capitalistic society. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Oh, my goodness. Yes, I absolutely. We have examples of some leaders, right, who have been leaders around causes, for example, who weren't necessarily serving a capitalistic structure. However, they're more rare and they lived very difficult lives. They also often lived in either tremendous danger or poverty, impoverished, and persecution. So it hasn't been, they've been seen as heroic because of their tremendous sacrifice rather than something that is aspirational and that we pour into and support. But I love the way that you also described, and I always find this fascinating when we have this conversation about leadership, because in my mind, coming from the United States, I just imagine, oh my goodness, the world is shifting and we're finally shifting towards ancient wisdom. Thank goodness I believe that the world is shifting towards ancient wisdom. And then we have a conversation and we talk about traditional leadership. And I'm like, oh no, wait, the way that we've been, doing this in the United States in these very kind of westernized ways that have been, 50 or 60 years old and very much about people who don't necessarily look like us in any way, who don't have the same kind of pedigree or gender identities or racial backgrounds or any of that, who have been defining leadership, again, in these capitalistic structures for the purpose of business, that we are calling that traditional. And I'm excited about, unlearning traditional, maybe in a specific context. It worked well and it worked. It did what it was supposed to do. But this ancient and emerging wisdom. And I think even in your bio, you describe, your work as being kind of a combination of ancient and emerging, because there is something really amazing and powerful about ancient. And there is some real resonance with me that there is also something new. There's also something that's very present that we need to acknowledge and honor as well. And that wasn't necessarily part of where we've been in the past, because we're also connected, because of the conversations that can happen across the globe simultaneously, because of, things like podcasts and Zoom and social media. So the ancient and emerging and the ability for us to see ourselves kind of growing towards something that is going to be the next wave of how we show up in the world is going to be really powerful. However, I still don't know exactly what it's going to look like in a way that's not only driven by a capitalist agenda, right? That also allows for the kind of equity that the world is calling for, right? People are asking for more equity than currently exists, and that is currently being kind of cultivated. And so we need to find that path as well as something that's going to be more sustainable. But I don't know exactly what it's going to look like, but I feel like we're going in that direction for sure.
I agree. In fact, sometimes I feel as if we tend to not even be aware just how entrenched we are in this particular society and how normal we've made it. And I recognize that just a few days ago, where, I get invited to speak quite a lot. And 2 days ago, I was speaking at this conference in the UK amongst coaches. And it was a climate change broader conversation. But then within that space, I don't know if you've seen also the advances. They've included JEDI work there, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion. And I just, at so first, when let me tell the story well and not rush it. At first, I had not fully prepared myself for the conversation. There was just a lot going on with me. But once I finally did, and I was just fully present in the conversation and engaging about just the dynamics of ethics and coaching and how can we hold space for a particular agenda where sometimes it's the people that pay the bills against that, how does the coach navigate that sort of space, etc. And the myths that we need to start busting for us to get into a higher consciousness around climate change. And I think that was my first climate sort of change conference I've been to. And I remember after that, debriefing with one of my friends and saying, I feel so re-energized. I feel like I just went into a different dimension when I was in that conference, because the level of conversation was just at this complexity and this ability to think systemically. Yes, acknowledging that there needs to be capital and the economy of things, but thinking really beyond that. And it took me stepping out of my norm and into this new space. And I'm glad I didn't pay enough for it, so that I can fully just experience that it feels so different. And it made me really pay attention to the type of conversations I want to have and my ability to influence the discourse, regardless of the space I find myself in. And it takes a lot of courage, but I think that's where we can find expression in who we are and that connection or integration with our work.
I agree so much with what you just said. And that's one of the things that has been, I think, kind of a benefit of COVID and the pandemic is, as horrifying as it's been in so many ways, it's also really forced an opportunity for people to travel more and to be a bit more nomadic, or to be a bit more free to live and experience different things. And there's part of me that, there's actually the fabric of me. The fabric of me believes that if we are going to do this work around equity, diversity, and inclusion, around kind of transforming ourselves, around finding a path forward, we have to get into different spaces. We have to get out of our own comfort zone. We have to get into a learning zone. And a learning zone is just outside of a comfort zone, right? To learn, we have to be willing to be courageous. We have to put ourselves in new spaces. We have to expand the ways in which we intake information, but also the ways in which potentially we think about and interrogate sometimes our own belief systems, to allow ourselves to have new language, new ways of communicating that allow us to develop a skill set that we have not had to date necessarily, and that's going to be absolutely essential for where we're going next. And so, you going to the UK or you coming to the US to study Ubuntu is it's a great example of that. Sometimes getting out of our context to reflect on something that is part of the context that we've been in is so important. It's like a fish needing to leave the water in order to fully analyze the water, to think about, what the water means from the point of view of a fish requires leaving the water and realizing and recognizing the value and understanding what the absence of that experience is in order to fully immerse ourselves again. And that's the beautiful journey that I think so many of us are on. And I encourage at least the clients that I work with and the people I'm surrounded by, but I definitely try to live by that. And I know that that's something also that you value, which has been so powerful as a learning experience for me as well with you.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I want to ask you, I want to take our conversation to one level a bit more kind of practical. You and I have worked together in my organization at DeEtta Jones and Associates. We have something called the Inclusive Managers Toolkit, and you have been one of the faculty members for that, absolutely bringing your deep expertise around leadership and around management, around organizational and individual effectiveness, and also bringing, in a very powerful way, kind of the reminder to all of the people who participate in that experience how important it is that there is wisdom that comes from all parts of the world, and that we are constantly seeing ourselves as learning from wisdom coming from many different places and many different voices. I'd love to get, and I also know that you have a very robust list of clients and people that you've worked with for many years. I'd love to get your perspective on the role of managers. I'm getting very practical here. What is the role? And we think about in an organizational context and the leadership and pushing and understanding leadership to be something that needs to be present in many places and in many parts of our world. What do you think is the unique role of people who are managers of other people in organizations for helping some of the transformation we seek?
I think it gives you a unique opportunity within the organizational system, well, firstly, to exercise your power. So that's permission. And remember, if there's certain rules within the system, and if you're not within that sort of rule category, you won't be able to express certain things, push certain things, etc. So managers have a unique ability to use their power within the space. And for me, generally, it's really about moving execution. So we speak a lot about the differences between leadership and management, right? And I love, of course, leadership. So I've also just tended to grow to love management more as I get practical into my world of getting just things completed, things finished, driving process, driving activity, and driving execution, which is a key element that we forget about. But it's so different from when we talk about this conversation of things. And now when I have to go sit in front of a CEO and tell him exactly how we're going to strategize around his EDI culture drivers, for instance, and what is the ROI of all of that. So I think that's the unique role of management. But even in saying that, when we look at the work of people like, I don't remember his name now before I forget, American philosopher Henry Mintzberg, he speaks a lot on management, but I found him when I was researching Ubuntu because he says that the manager's role is to drive communityship within the organization. In fact, he's like, perhaps we don't even need this term called leadership because it's so tainted with all these other things, right, that make it so heavy and political. And then he introduced the term communityship. And I thought it was so brilliant, particularly in terms of the style of management that he was now talking about. In that, yes, managers drive process, but there's also a style and a way of driving process that we need to be sort of aware about. And what then becomes unique from a person who manages people versus a self-managed, for instance, or an independent contributor, is that they then also can look at the dynamic of how am I impacting this value creation process, and looking at it from a sort of broader perspective, as opposed to when you're a contributor, you're just looking at your piece, right, of the value chain. Whereas managers rather, more specifically, need to know how all these pieces fit together and how him or her, as the manager, fits within the process as well.
Brilliant. I love that. It's funny. I've studied Mintzberg, but I hadn't picked up on that specific language. I'm going to go back because I think it's brilliant. And it's exactly, to me, it feels like such a resonant answer to the question, because you're right. It's not just the thing that has been more sexy or glamorous in the past, leadership. Management is really where managers touch so many things in more practical day-to-day ways that allow for things to either flow or get stuck, right? And to be able to see oneself as having agency, right? That idea of having power and being able to use it in the service of myself and in the and others, and in the context of trying to accomplish our shared goals that are aligned with our shared values is incredibly powerful. I absolutely love that connection. I'm going to go back now and read some more about this because I think it's a great connection. It's incredibly powerful.
Yeah, he's still writing a lot of new stuff in that space. As you said, that hasn't been that sexy, but he's kind of, bringing the sexy back for management.
There we go. I think management is so underrated. It's so important. We haven't really given it but it's interesting because I just came from a conference in Portugal. We were talking about this before, and everyone I spoke to, when we got down to the real practicalities of it all, they all said people who are leading equity, diversity, and inclusion, who are CEOs, who are HR leaders, all sorts of different people who have kind of leadership titles in organizations, all at the end of the day came down to the same thing. Managers have so much ability to really help us drive an agenda. It's something that's really powerful. If we can help managers see this as something that is meaningful to them, meaningful to the organization, and then really kind of align that energy. A lot of times in organizations, managers have the hardest jobs, right? They feel like they have to report up to all those ROI stats, right? They're always driving KPIs. They always are trying to make the case for why it is that their unit, their part of the organization needs to be protected, needs more resources. They're advocating, right, for their people and their resources. And then, of course, they have the people who work with them who they need to advocate for as well. They're constantly helping to solve problems and give feedback and provide coaching and alignment and also reporting on, keeping track of things. It's such a difficult job. The tricky part with managers is that they're pulled either kind of in either of two directions, but being able to see themselves as having support amongst each other and see themselves as having kind of an identity that has a unique opportunity to really help with where we're going is a powerful repositioning, I think, of the idea of management. That's fantastic.
Let me tell you, if I can just be honest, I'm a great leader, but founding the tribe made me realize that I was not a great leader.
It's harder. I agree with you. It's harder to be a manager.
And I also I've never been great at being managed too. So it's just been such an interesting, internal, struggle. But when you are building something that you are now passionate about and want to see it, things to fruition, here I was taking the time more now before my meetings to prep, to make sure that I'm looking at the detail and I'm not kind of outsourcing it to someone else and paying it. And that creates, or rather instills, a certain discipline actually in your organization when there's a consciousness around paying attention to the detail. Because for me, as much as it's a practical thing, how I've made sense of it is that it's almost this way of aligning the system to its natural flow of productivity. And if we looked at it that way, then managers also, appreciate the well-being part of it, of productivity.
Yes.
Right? And it's not just about the reporting, the numbers, the ROI stuff, etc., but it's also how I got there, right? And through who and how did that influence people to actually, execute and get things unstuck, as you put it.
I absolutely agree on the resonance. And thank you so much. First of all, I love the word discipline. I get a lot of pushback about that because discipline for some people seems like it might be harsh or negative. I actually think discipline is a foundation for people who are going to be effective at any stage, that there needs to be some things that we commit to and that we actually do, right? And showing up in the way that I want to show up takes discipline practice. It means if I want to show up as being emotionally intelligent, if I want to show up as being a role model, if I want to show up as being patient, if I want to create space for other voices, then there are certain disciplines that I have to build into my life. I have to, that may not have anything to do with work, but have everything to do with work, right? That include my meditation practice or the food that I ingest or making sure that I have the right amount of caffeine, but not too much because it's 1 cup away from being kind of a nightmare, or the right amount of sleep, or showing gratitude, the words that I choose, right? I can choose affirmative words over negative and punishing words. And all of those are, to me, the way that I think you just also alluded to this beautifully are the combination or the alignment between discipline, well-being, and also intentionality. And that's what we're talking about when we're talking about inclusive leadership and management. It's those intentional practices and understanding that all of those things have to be present in me in order for me to create space for it to exist around me. And the benefits of that are not only going to be to my organization, but they will absolutely be for me as well. And that beautiful kind of synergy, but it takes work. I can't just go through life on autopilot. I can't be constantly in the mode of putting out fires. I can't always be in crisis mode. I have to be able and willing to prioritize some of those other things that are part of a disciplined practice that will allow me to show up with the kind of intentionality necessary.
So true. And you can only fully understand that once you've actually embodied it. Like in my work at the moment, I'm doing a lot of coaching circles, right? And what you're talking about exactly is getting managers and leaders comfortable, firstly, just having these conversations, but also then conscientizing them on these issues and making it normal to talk about it in terms of, I actually have an issue with this member of the team and I see us struggling to connect. Help me find better ways to really work well together and also just find commonalities in who we are as humans. And it always goes back to that, being human. When we were looking at, as the tribe, the Nomalanga Tribe, our 3 pillars of well-being, leadership, and culture, it almost happened automatically. Like, I didn't really have to think very hard about it because there's so much synergy in those 3 things. It's almost the same sort of thing working together and maybe representing the heart, the soul of the organization, like in a way that keeps it sort of going. And at first, I didn't know also how I could infuse and integrate the 3, right? Because especially now, when the culture aspect of our work is really specifically around justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and belonging work, right? But when I took a step back and looked at the fundamental principles of these things that we're talking about, as you say, it is about intentionality and consciousness. In fact, one of the quotes that really put me in this aha moment around our work is the Stephen Frost quote that says if you're not consciously including, you're unconsciously excluding. And it points directly to what you actually are saying. But I noticed that when I'm sitting with leaders, 6 leaders in a coaching circle, and we're talking about the importance of how do I make space, how do I take space, and giving them the tools, on how to navigate the Johari window and all of that sort of stuff. It's very hard to teach the stuff from a hit space. Like it almost doesn't land also the way that you want it to.
Yeah.
And it doesn't also translate to action. Whereas, this is important work that needs activity, activism, execution, all of those outward activities. And I think for me, you are so right in terms of when I'm conscious, when I prepared how I got into that coaching circle in my meditation practice, and my yoga practice, my whatever. Some people pray, some people go for a boxing session, some people go Pilates, whatever it might be. But it's this process of, I guess, aligning yourself, grounding yourself, aligning your energy, being conscious of yourself within this body. I know that sounds, kind of cosmic and out there, but that is the power and the strength and the meta beingness, I don't know if I can put it that way, that makes me influential and differentiates me actually in the space.
Yep.
Because as you see, it's become so populated. I mean, what is your voice and how do you share your way of intervening in it if it's not stemming from a place of embodiment and this experience?
I love it. Yes. And the embodiment is just absolutely right. I know so many people. I've done this, also I've kind of intellectualized certain things. And I know that this is often practice. People are like, just tell me exactly what to do. Just tell me, give me the checklist. Okay. But have you tried any of it? Right. If you're coming to work always frazzled and always in crisis mode and always in problem solving mode, but you haven't taken a nap ever, or you're hungry, or the food that you're eating is not sitting well with your system. If you're unhealthy, right? Whatever it is, if you don't have a loving relationships in your personal world and or in your organization, all of those things are necessary, right? To actually be able to kind of zoom out. And I know that we live in a world where quick hits and little sound bites are very popular, but the embodiment of the interconnected pieces of ourselves is exactly where I feel like we should be. And I feel like the work that you've done has always been so resonant with me, because I think you've always described that. You've always come to it in that way. And I've never seen a really effective leader. And I've worked, for many, many years, 30 plus years, with a lot of different kinds of leaders. Everybody has a different style. I don't have an opinion about the exact right style of leadership, and you have to be exactly this or exactly that. But you have to be able to think about all the different aspects of who I am and how I want to show up in the world, and put those things together in a disciplined and intentional practice that works for you and that allows you to have the outcomes that you seek. But that ability to kind of pull back and say, I have to say no to this, or I have to invest this in myself, and I'm not going to worry about how this might be judged, or I'm going to make sure that my voice is authentic to me, or that I'm embodying the things that I believe in, are present, is absolutely necessary. But you're right, this is not an intellectual activity, which in the United States is part of the difficulty, right? We believe ourselves, especially in the United States. I don't know how prevalent this is also in your world, but in the United States, we believe ourselves to be very analytical. We believe ourselves to be very objective. And it's hard to be perfectly analytical and objective and all of these other things at the same time, because some things aren't just about reading a book and having a checklist and following it. Some things really are about embodying things that are a little bit more ambiguous, that may be a little bit more about consciousness or even spirituality.
Right. And even if we don't use those specific words, when we break it down, it really goes goes down to that. And if we are reflective, let's say somebody who joined your Inclusive Management Toolkit program, if that person really reflects afterwards, those are the tools actually that you get. Obviously, it's within a particular context, so we want to tailor it for the organizational success, etc. But that's the core. And I think what you're mentioning around your inner world, connecting to the outer world, and managing that space is so key. Because one of the key lessons that we came to in one of the coaching circles I had as well, and these are executives, right, that it takes them a while to move even into the space and just acknowledge that it exists. For them, they'd rather maybe think that we are just machinery and robotic and that sort of thing, and maybe just say the words about people being our greatest asset. But that's not where I'm going today with the conversation. Where I do want to go is that one of the biggest aha moments we got was around, if you haven't been aware of yourself in terms of, the first question you asked, what are the ingredients of joy, and how diverse those parts are of who you are. And you haven't calibrated, integrated, sat with all of those things internally and been aware of it constantly as you engage as a manager or a leader. Of course, it will make the journey of becoming a conscious, inclusive leader more difficult because you haven't walked the journey. You haven't exercised the brain capacity. You haven't built the neurological pathways to even start thinking that, in fact, perhaps some of it you've even shunned and seen it as weak within yourself. Or if I'm actually caring about people I work with and I show that, that's a bit of a weakness. So I can't say that within myself. If I actually show self-care, I know this is an interesting topic around self-care and maybe being overindulgent around. I know the older generation has views on it. But if you haven't been able to love yourself, it's a simple fact of how can you then learn the skills and have the apparatus of loving them outside of yourself. And that we can exchange the word love with any other word, that can suit our topic for today. But it's just the point around the interconnectedness of what's happening in your inner world and your journey of conquering that versus then showing up to be able to actually include others as well.
I love it. I love it. I love the word love. I have no fear of it, but I agree. Not everyone will find it as easily palatable, but it's inspiring to know that this conversation is happening in many different places. And I know you with the Nomalanga Tribe are building a lot of really wonderful leaders and space for people to understand what this looks like, this new works looks like. What's next? What's next with your work?
So we are publishing the book, right? At first I thought it would be published without a forward, right? And then I found someone so amazing. I'll share a bit later on in terms of who can just introduce this body of work in the world. And it's a book around self-healing, self-rediscovery, and self-leading, and just learning the art of doing that as a journey process. Excited about using that as a resource in a lot of the programs and courses that we run anyway, and even in the individual coaching sessions, because it really is more of a guidebook that's interactive and requires you to reflect and put on paper some of these thoughts, these feelings that we maybe are ashamed or shy to do outside of ourselves. So this is almost the first sort of step for self-healing. And then secondly, building and improving the phases of the app that support leader wellness. And for me, I'm so excited about the possibility, as you mentioned earlier, of combining these ancient indigenous healing sort of arts and interventions within this new age tech application at the palm of your hand, and combining those two worlds in that sort of way I think that once we achieve that, I'll be very pleased with myself and
I can't
for
wait.
sure.
Oh, I can't wait. I will be one of your very first subscribers and absolutely one of the first people to buy the book. I learned so much from you. Every time we speak, I feel like your presence in the world is just such a gift to me and to all of us, everyone who has come into contact with you. And definitely we get the same when our clients and our participants in the Inclusive Managers Toolkit and other places interact. Thank you for your wisdom. Before we leave, though, I have a quick question. I sometimes ask this of our other podcast guests, and I thought, I'm just going to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot, so you have to think quick. If you could say that there's one song that represents the soundtrack of your life right now, one song that you feel just is really resonating with you, what would it be and why?
I love that question and I've been just exploring my gift of sound healing, and music has been a very big part of that the last year. And the one song that immediately pops into my mind is the song Believer by this lady in Africa called Asa, but it's pronounced Asha with an H. And it's such an uplifting song. Well, firstly, she looks like a unicorn in that music video. The way she danced, her moves, unbounded, free, nothing you've ever seen before. You can't say what dance move is that. She's just moving to the music and re-emphasizing, I think, what I said earlier to you around my core identity being a believer. And when she just goes, I'm a believer. I'm a believer. I just love it so much, and I hope you get to just kind of listen and check it out.
Definitely. I've been working on putting together a soundtrack for Culture Road. So this is definitely going to make the soundtrack. Thank you so much, Dr. Joy. It's been a delight, as always, having this conversation with you. Thank you for the work that you do, and make sure to let us know. We will we'll make sure to send out all of your social media information. But also we can't wait for your book to drop and also for that amazing app. And we'll keep following the Nomalanga Tribe and you, of course, Dr. Joy.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the invitation and you and all of you, all the people that work with you and have actually opened this platform for us to connect, seen and unseen in the room.
Thank you, Dr. Joy.